I'm Kevin Davis, and this is the Catholic Family Podcast, and I am honored to be joined again by His Excellency Reverend Bishop McGuire. And this has been a podcast I've actually been looking forward to a lot, even though it's not something that I actually deal with myself, but it's something that people have asked us to cover. And His Excellency has been kind enough to spend some of his very valuable time today to talk about scruples and how to overcome being over scrupulous. And then we're also going to talk a bit, I hope, about the melancholic temperament. And it's something that again, I'm a phlegmatic sanguine, so it would be really helpful to me. And my wife is melancholic, so it'd be really helpful to me if His Excellency can give me some tips on how to understand melancholics, because it's the opposite of what I am. So I have a hard time sometimes really coming to grips with like, okay, what are you thinking? What is the process of what's going on here? So hopefully we can cover a bit about that as well. And Your Excellency, thank you so much for coming on and covering this topic.
Oh no, my pleasure. I'm glad to be here, Kevin.
Great. And Your Excellency, I know in the past you wanted to start with a prayer. Would you like to do that again today?
Yes, please. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Saint Peter of Alcantara,
pray for us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Perfect. Thank you, Excellency. And I know, again, I think the best place to start for this question would be, what does it mean to be overly scrupulous, or what are scruples, I suppose?
Good question. So, scruples, it's actually interesting. The word comes from Latin, scrupulous, and it means a tiny pebble that gets stuck in your shoe and sort of sets you off balance. And so that's that I always found that to be an interesting thing. But a scruple is, I should say, if a scrupulous conscience is the kind of the obsessive fear of sin, of sinning, where there is no reason to fear sin. It is to think you're sinning when you're not, or to think you're committing a mortal sin when it's a venial sin. But it's an obsessive fear and an obsessive doubt.
So, and how would you know that, Your Excellency? I mean, I guess I'm already jumping right into it, but how can you understand when it is being overly scrupulous and not just being worried about committing sin? I mean, I guess it's a hard line, I suppose, to judge.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Something people shouldn't diagnose themselves on that, just as you wouldn't diagnose yourself necessarily for physical sickness. So also with an illness of the soul, you just don't diagnose yourself in this. I always say everybody from time to time has scruples, but not everybody is scrupulous. That's a big difference. Everyone has a doubt from time to time, and it turns out to be nothing, right? Everyone has a fear that he has sinned, and it might turn out to be nothing. But when you're unable to judge whether or not you've sinned, or whether something is mortal or not, then that's when you're scrupulous. You have a scrupulous conscience. There's we can go more into that as we start, or as we go on, but I think that's the key word here is the fear or the doubt is obsessive. It is obsessive, where you're constantly obsessing over whether or not you've sinned, whether or not it's mortal sin, whether or not you've confessed something, and it just takes over your day, your life, if you let it.
And it's interesting, Your Excellency, that it really brings to mind. I recently watched a documentary about Martin Luther, and they said that was one of his worst traits was being overly scrupulous, and that he would want to confess his sins several times a day,
Mhm.
And I guess my next question for you, I guess, would be, what is the real issue be if you are overly scrupulous? And I guess maybe I'll answer it myself. Is that, well, look what happened to Martin Luther. He was so scrupulous and so worried about the sins that he actually hadn't even committed that he just eventually said, well, I guess it's not even my fault, so it doesn't even matter. I mean, he's an extreme, obviously, but is that one of the I guess the errors you can fall into if you're scrupulous?
Absolutely. No, for him, it was just that his came from he had a very deep-seated pride. He would not listen to his spiritual director for anything. When it came to his problems of conscience, he would not listen to him, and that was through his pride, and then that led him to be constantly fearing sin, and eventually led to despair. But yeah, that many times is the outcome of scruples. If you're not ready and willing to obey your confessor, um, the end result is you, you give up. Um, you just give up on the prayers, give up on the faith. Because it's too hard. It's like you think that God is expecting more than He really does.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, Your Excellency, how do you? I'll ask you this question first. I actually had a mother who we told her we were going to do this show, and she asked, "How do you try to instill in your children not to be scrupulous, especially if you see that could be an issue, maybe because they are melancholic or that type of personality? What's the best way, I guess, even before they get to adulthood, and then the confessor should be more in charge? I mean, what would be your recommendation of how to, yeah, try to keep it from happening at all? Is that possible, do you think?
Yes, very much. It's teaching them the faith, teaching them the catechism, the commandments. Oftentimes, scruples come from sometimes from just a lack of knowledge of the faith. So if you take care to teach them the faith, and make sure that you as a parent understand it, so that you're not being over exacting on anything. That goes a long way. But it's combined with prayer. It's also combined with, um, I guess we trads have this uncanny inclination, for whatever reason, to be so condemnatory and so strict, that we even look at God as being only just. We never look at him as being, I shouldn't say we never do, but many people have a hard time looking at God's mercy. And perhaps part of that is because they're overreacting to the Novus Ordo, who's always talking about mercy and love and everything. But no, God is love. St. John says that, you know. Um, God isn't just waiting around a corner for you to make a little mistake so he can punish you. He doesn't relish in punishing you. And it's getting that attitude across to your children. Um, it's also partly how the parent raises his child. If they're overly stern, which can easily happen, if they're overly stern, that does play a role in it, you know. So I think it's a combination of all those things. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I guess, Your Excellency, as they grow, is that also something that you should instill in them, the desire or the recognition that they need to really put themselves in the hands of their confessor? And I think that's because I think it seems like, as you said, that's a big part of it is just knowing our faith, and I guess very simply knowing what is right and what is wrong,
Hmm.
and And then I suppose that's what the confessor can be there to help you with the more complicated things.
Yes, no, absolutely. Um, I will say this though, that even obviously people that know their faith very well, many times go through these periods of scrupulosity, and sometimes it lasts a whole lifetime. That you're always fighting the inclination to it. Um, Oftentimes that comes through pride. It could be from the devil even, or a purification from God. But it's it's just a tendency that one has to fight, and you just must obey your confessor, bring those things to his attention, you know, and obey.
And you think then, Your Excellency, let's say, I guess if you're in a small parish, your confessor probably knows you well. I mean, but if you're in a big parish and the priest has to get through confessions, fairly quickly during, before mass, say, I mean, is that something you should then just tell your confessor, tell the priest that I do have a problem with scruples, or I think I might have a problem with scruples, and then let him kind of figure that out, or walk it through?
Yes, yes, that's the best. I would counsel people that are not sure if they have scruples to say just that. Um, and those who have already been diagnosed with scrupulosity, especially in the bigger parishes, should say that to the confessor. Should always say, I've been told by my confessor that, that I'm scrupulous. That is really helpful for the priest to know, you know. Um, yeah, that's very helpful in a lot of ways, you know.
Well, in that case, obviously the priest can only work with what he is told, with what he knows. So that makes sense. And it's something that I did a podcast with Father Benedict Hughes a few months ago about the confession, about the sacrament of penance, which I highly recommend everyone to watch. It's absolutely fantastic. I think we spent an hour and a half kind of doing the ins and outs of the sacrament, and I guess it's one of those things. If someone is overly scrupulous, Your Excellency, do you think they're also more likely to fear the confessional? I mean, I think many people fear the confessional. I speaking for myself, I absolutely do myself. And I guess that's the pride and the shame, or whatever those issues are. Is that something that's going to be more so with someone who's scrupulous, do you think, or just kind of depends on the
Absolutely,
person?
absolutely, because it's a mixtures. When you really have a scrupulous conscience, there's um, a mixture of fear and of doubt, and then just it's a paralyzing doubt where you're just not sure, and then you're afraid that by going to confession you're not going to make a good confession. It all perpetuates itself, and then once you leave the confessional you go away thinking, well, I made a bad confession, or I forgot this or that, or I wasn't sorry enough. So in an extreme case, that's what happens. And yes, it does bring bring about a terrible fear of the confessional. Yes.
And so, Your Excellency, with this being the case, I mean, what are how does someone, I guess, like, practically fix this? I mean, because it sounds to me like a lot of the same issues with, say depression, or not, I wouldn't say despair, but again, as you saw with Martin Luther, kind of this, everything's so bad that it just spirals out of control. I mean, how do people? It's actually another topic we'd love to cover someday, is how to overcome dark thoughts and depression. I mean, how how can people practically do that, Your Excellency? What would be your advice for someone? We'll stick with scruples, but I mean, how do they practically overcome that issue?
Well, it's the spiritual axiom, agere contra, act against it. You know, um, you know, it's um, it's a matter of simply obeying, simply obeying. Once you're diagnosed, your priest will usually give you a set of rules, and you obey those rules, no matter how you feel. Even if you're convinced that you've committed a mortal sin, right? If your priest has told you it is not a mortal sin and you are not to confess it, it's not a mortal sin, and you're not to confess it. So no matter how you feel about it, the cure is obedience. It is prompt obedience. Don't question it. Don't rethink things. That's essentially it. Father Chicata gave, I have it here actually. He did up a little pamphlet on fighting scrupulosity. He gives a a few points on the signs of scrupulosity. Then he gives some helps. And he gives these rules for going to confession. I carried this thing around in my wallet for the longest time when I was younger. And he says, these are some helps. Point one is to think of scruples as a disease that you have to get rid of. Resolve to get rid of them with the help of the priest. So don't go priest shopping, don't go from one priest to another. Choose a confessor and stick to him. Ask God to help you get rid of scruples. Say a special prayer for this intention every day. Hate scruples and act against them. Don't think about things that give you scruples. The fourth point is look upon God as supremely good and as a loving Father. I'm skipping a few points. Avoid idleness, things like that. Point 8, I always liked. Let the priest do the worrying for you. You don't need to worry about a thing. The priest will take everything upon himself, and he will answer for your soul. You will not have to, if you obey him in these matters. And then he memorize the following rules. I must hate my scruples. I am permitted to do anything that I see devout people do. I have not committed a mortal sin unless there was no doubt that it was a mortal sin. I'm not obliged to confess anything unless there is no doubt that it was a mortal sin. And I must accept these rules and follow the advice the priest gives me. Plain and simple.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's amazing with our faith, isn't it, Excellency, that we are given every possible aid and help to get to heaven. Typically when we don't, or when we struggle, it's because we don't use what we have. And obviously one of those being the sacrament of confession. And here's a very I guess basic question, Your Excellency, is do you, if you're some people obviously don't have the choice between priests and confessors, obviously, but do you go and ask your priest if he can be your confessor? Is that something you straight out, in the confessional, or do you meet him outside the church and say, Father, I'm looking for a confessor. Can you be it? Or how does someone approach a priest or a bishop that way?
Well, usually in the case of a scrupulous person, the priest who is hearing that confession should ask the penitent, do you already have a priest that you're going to for this? And if not, that priest should take this soul under his wing. That's generally how it works. But but yeah, I would say if the scrupulous person does not already have a priest working with him, then he should ask a priest. Yes, most definitely.
And should every Catholic person have a confessor of their own? Let's take even scrupulous people out of it and just say everyone, or is it more so if you're scrupulous?
I think it's more so if you're scrupulous. Today, it's nearly impossible for people to have, a regular spiritual director or confessor, just because the small number of priests. Just to do what we do is a lot. But certainly a scrupulous person needs that, and the priest really should take time out for that. I remember in my teenage years when I was going through this, Father Chikata, God rest his soul, he was the most patient man. I had so many questions, and the confessions must have tried his patience, but he was always so patient, always expressed the mercy of God, tried to instill greater confidence, confidence in God, confidence in myself even. Um, and I overcame it through his help. It took a long time, but it was through his help. He didn't just give up because he got frustrated with the repeated questions, you know.
And was that something, Your Excellency, when you were younger? Then did you, was it something you just realized one day? It's like, oh, I may be this, or maybe you confessed something. I don't want to ask about your confessions, obviously, but was that something that struck you one time, or was it something that was it gradually like, okay, this could be a problem for me?
Do you know what? He diagnosed me. I
Okay.
didn't. I had an excessive case, where I guess there's religious scruples and then there's natural scruples. Natural scruples is what they call OCD. You
Hmm.
know, I think that probably I mind boarded on the OCD for a while. Um, but yeah, it was definitely something that Father Chikata diagnosed. I just um, went in really just thinking I was committing all sorts of sins where I wasn't, and all of that. So he finally picked it out, and priests know how to pick that out, usually pretty easily. You know.
Interesting. And Your Excellency, do you think, kind of moving on to the melancholic topic, I mean, is that something that, again, do you think that personality is affected more commonly than the others?
Yes, yes, because they are very inclined to be perfectionists, to do everything just right. And so there is a propensity, especially among melancholics, to be scrupulous. Yes, absolutely. You know.
And I guess what else comes along with that, with the melancholic term? I was telling you before the show, Your Excellency, that my wife is melancholic, my daughter's melancholic. So I want to learn about melancholics. Help me to understand the melancholic mind, because it'll help me out a lot. I'm a phlegmatic sanguine, so I'm on the other side of the spectrum, and so it is harder for me sometimes to understand. I guess the depth of the melancholic. That they have a much different way of thinking than I do. And I guess we don't have to spend an hour on it, but what, in a nutshell, Your Excellency, what would you say that means to be a melancholic personality?
Well, I would say that you can't box somebody into a temperament. Everyone's different. We talked about this just before the show. Everyone's a little bit different, and some of the melancholics are more inclined to be contemplative. Some are more intellectual, kind of dry personality. Um, but I think it all boils down to the way to recognize if you're melancholic is based on your reactions. You know, the reaction to whatever acts upon you. It could be a situation, um, a person, an event. If your reactions are weak, um, at first they're very weak, but over time they become very deep. That's usually a sign of melancholy. So a big example would be somebody that just drives you up a wall, or somebody that commits an injustice against you. You know, at first a melancholic is very calm about everything, but after repeated actions, it really drives it down, and it drives it down deep, like hammering a nail. You know, it gets deeper and deeper, and then if not careful, you just can't uproot it. Same with good actions, forming a habit. That's why melancholics are I would say, the most inclined to the spiritual life, because they are deep. They reflect a lot, and they reflect on just about everything. And so over time, by repeated actions, it drives, it makes it almost immovable. The different principles, your convictions. If somebody treats you unjustly, the lack of forgiveness. So I would say that though it's more, their reactions at first are very weak, but over time they're just driven down deeper. Um, so I'd
And
start out in that way.
yeah, sorry, Excellency. Yeah, I mean, if you know someone is melancholic, I suppose. Let's say you know they're melancholic and you know that they are the nail has been driven deep, I suppose. How do you get through to them? How do you try to, I don't know, overcome their melancholy, I suppose? Or I guess on the flip side, as a melancholic, if you're struggling with these things that have been driven deep in the the depth of something that has gone on longer, I mean, how do you try to overcome that and to say, okay, I need to, I don't know, forgive or whatever the issue is?
Yeah, I mean, it depends sometimes, but I would say overall, um, if you're dealing with a melancholic, first of all, I think it's don't try to solve the problem right then and there. I mean, I think it's important to make it clear that there is a problem, and say that, to tell them that you want to talk about this, and you want to talk, and let them know if they want to talk about something, that you're willing to listen and hear. I think it's that. And then talk about it. I would say the most important thing is, when you're dealing with the melancholic, they will not react well in, say, confrontation. Usually, if they're corrected or told to do something, they don't like the idea. They find all kinds of excuses why not to do it, and look at everything in a very pessimistic way. But then, because they reflect, they'll leave the conversation, they'll think about it, and then they'll come back and they'll apologize, or they'll realize the correct way to go. So I think it's a mix of, first of all, when you're dealing with them, you speak to them, then you give them their time, and then welcome another conversation, even encourage it. And if you are the melancholic person, I think it's first of all, when there's problems, don't your first inclination is to isolate yourself. That is the worst thing to do. Go to your room, go somewhere and hide, be away from people. And actually, that's exactly what you should not do. You should talk through the problems calmly, be willing to listen and to admit when you're wrong, and take the corrections. And that's something that's very hard to do, especially when when the melancholic is in the wrong. But that's one of those things that you just have to humble yourself and admit it sometimes.
What's been the hardest thing, Your Excellency, for you to overcome as a melancholic, I suppose, especially being a priest and then a bishop? Is it maybe there's nothing, but I mean, usually every temperament has its major flaws, and I guess the melancholics being perhaps too pessimistic or something. I mean, is that something that's something that you continually have to overcome? And it's something when you look at the great saints, they're always overcoming something, right? I'm not saying you're there yet, Your Excellency. We'll pray that you reach that status, but it's amazing when you see some of these saints that you hear, they are these firebrands, but then they overcame it and became the most humble people out there.
Well, gee, Kevin, how'd you know I was melancholic, first of all?
Just a guess.
But yeah, no, it's yeah, it's something you're always fighting. It's a temperament is something you're born with. Character is something different. Character is something that you've formed over time, but a temperament, well, that's something you're born with, certain inclinations, and something that you have to fight your whole life long. If there's always struggles that you're going to have to deal with. Yeah, my big thing, I guess, if you would sort of a public confession on this, and you can ask any of the priests with whom I have to work. One of my worst things is communication. The melancholic tends to be more private, have a smaller group of friends, but very close friends. And just, has a hard time really liking the communication side of things, whereas the sanguine loves it. That's why Father McKenna and I, we work pretty well together. He likes to talk. I don't. His good points, my bad points would be his good points, and vice versa. We balance each other out very well, I think. We drive each other crazy, but we're really close friends at the same time. So we kind of help each other. He helps me to look at life more from a lighter angle. Realize you have to step away from work and just sort of take it easy, take a deep breath, and that's where he's extremely helpful there. And yeah, just making sure that we're communicating all the time.
And would you say, Your Excellency, then, is it good for people to, if you're a melancholic, to try to find friends who are sanguine, I suppose, or to find someone like a Father McKenna who can kind of help you to see the other side, I suppose? I mean, it's something that I mean, it's the same with my wife and I, that we are very opposite in many ways, but in many ways that really helps. It really does help to have a good teamwork where we kind of fill in the gaps. I think, as I'm sure probably on your side too, it's also sometimes hard to just simply understand the thought process of another temperament, especially again for me, the melancholics, is just kind of like, wait, okay, why is this? What is this about? Just because I can't think of it that way. But I suppose, I mean, I guess that's the issue with dealing with anyone, isn't it? Is empathy, is trying to understand them. I guess that's the first place to start, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's constantly. I think it's good to have friends who are your opposite. I think that's very good. It helps to balance you out. So if you're looking for a means of sanctification, that's really it. If you're in the married looking for a spouse, a lot of times people opposites attract. So a lot of times the person is attracted to someone of the exact opposite temperament, and that can really help to balance out your whole spiritual life. So it does help to sanctify you. It really does, but there's a lot that goes into temperament again. So I would say, again, not to just put everyone into those 4 boxes. Look at the Myers-Briggs temperament test. They give 16 personality. And I think that's the best the best um, the best site or whatever to go to if you want to learn about your personality and your temperament. Take that test, and it pegs you. It pegs you. And so my particular, not just being melancholic, but my particular personality, um, I've always had, my closest friends were usually sanguines, you know. Um, so yeah, it does help to balance a person out, and I'm repeating myself, but that's okay.
No, it's totally fine. Well, and it's interesting too that you say that you really can't pigeonhole people into just one of these four. And it's true. Like for me, I'm definitely phlegmatic, sanguine. Sanguine, you see it in the show, and I can talk, but I'm actually introverted, and I know that people wouldn't believe that, but I actually, if I've had a rough day or something, I need to have time by myself. I really go. I get power from being alone. While my wife, who's a melancholic, gets it from other people. And it's pretty interesting. So it shows you again, it's not just these. It is not just cookie cutter. Here it is. It's all easily laid out. But I think it does help, especially I think as a parent, to understand basically. Okay, really kind of at the
Yeah.
you know overview. Okay, this is what they are. So this is some of what I can expect.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. And the temperament, oh goodness, I would say if more parents did focus on learning the temperament of their children, there would be a lot less problems in the behavior of the children. You know, I was just reading before the show. There's actually a theologian who wrote about the temperaments. Everyone's used to that one by Hawk, Alfred Hawk, I think is his name, Hock. Um, that book on the four temperaments. There's another one by a Father Antonio Royo Marin, and that one you can type his name in the four temperaments on Google, and it'll come up. Very interesting read. Um, but he says in the training of children or training of self, he said that the parent should realize this about the child, the melancholic child, that there's a strong tendency to focus on self. If you don't know that about the child, he says that you could easily do that child an injustice or treat him uh, without tact, and that has a long-lasting effect on a child. You can't be all the time. The child can't always be under the parent's thumb, especially if he's melancholic. That creates in him a great stubbornness, in the melancholic child, a great stubbornness, um, and a rebellion against authority. So that's one thing. He also says, he says, you want to avoid being too stern or rigid, because that, going back to the scruples, that causes a tendency towards scrupulosity, towards more of a depression, a negativity in them. So you can't be too stern. Don't you? Have to watch that. And he says to instill in the child a great confidence in God and a confidence in oneself, that he can do things, and encourage his talents, the things that he likes, if they're good and wholesome, encourage those things. Don't do things for him. A lot of parents want to do that. Father McKenna always calls them helicopter parents. They're always hovering about their children, and kind of not letting them go outside to play. I notice that in a lot of parents today. They're afraid to let their kids go outside and play, and fall down and skin their knees. They're always correcting them. They're always doing this. That's not going to build up confidence in the child. On the contrary, it's going to make them always dependent on someone else. They'll never be able to make a decision, never feel that they can do anything, and will be timid the rest of their lives. So it's always important to develop that confidence in God, confidence in self. Let them go out and make mistakes. Let them, learn from their little mistakes, and don't let them go out and let the boys be boys. You go play in the creek, with frogs and all that stuff. It's important to build up in them, he says, optimism. Their tendency is to see everything in life very, very negatively. That's just the inclination that they have. So build up the optimism. Again, that's where the sanguine comes in handy. And it says, get them to destroy their indecision and cowardice by making firm resolutions. Throw them in the water to teach them to swim. That's really how the melancholic has to be taught. Build up the confidence, and then just toss them and let them figure it out. You maybe answer questions, but make them do it. And that's what he says. And he also says that sometimes you have to give them a regimen of sleep and recreation. Make sure they recreate, because their tendency will be to work too hard, to think. They're always thinking. Their brain is always going. I told Father McKenna, I said, on my vacation, my brain was going the whole vacation. I couldn't get away from work, so you have to train the melancholic to do that, because it's not their inclination. So
Interesting.
yeah.
Wow, interesting stuff. Boy, Excellency. Now I kind of want to do all of the temperaments, but I suppose another time. No, it's really fascinating, and I think you're so right how important it is, and it's something that I'm fortunate my parents really. I think they got that from the beginning. I know my mom said that when my oldest brother was a high choleric, and she understood, because she knew that he was a choleric, that the way to help him not have tantrums was to explain things to him very detailed, so that he could grasp it, so that he could understand, this is why this is happening. This is why, you can't, or whatever. And it shows you, again, as you say, that if you understand even the basics of personalities, boy, I think it is a huge help. I mean, it's hard enough being a parent dealing with children of all temperaments if you don't actually know they have a temperament. So I think that's a very recommendable thing to go and to read this book. But I think I'm going to go read it now too, I can say. And I think my wife probably would too, because I think it's exactly what we need, that extra help, because why not? Again.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I might add one more thing, if you don't mind, to that.
Please.
It's kind of like it comes from Saint Therese. She was melancholic and very sensitive. She had the scruples. She had all that. But I learned from her, and her whole spirituality reflects this, that if you want to be a good influence on the melancholic, you want to win their friendship, you want to be a good parent, one thing to know, again, is they're always going to be stern on themselves. They're always like beating themselves up for something they've said or done. And other people might look at it and say, well, what are you feeling bad about? You didn't do anything wrong. But they tend to be perfectionist and pessimistic. So they're always beating themselves up. So people that tend to be more just have to watch that. The melancholic is already beating himself up. So he doesn't usually need someone else to beat him up. They're won by love, by kindness, by all of that. You don't want to spoil people, but so you have to avoid that. But they're really won over by kindness, not by harshness and yelling and screaming. That's just sort of how the melancholic works, I guess.
It's interesting with my daughter. She's 3, and she's melancholic, and she's very emotional, and you don't need to raise your voice ever or anything. You just you don't even need to say you're disappointed. She knows, like if she does something she's not supposed to, you look at her and she'll burst into tears, and it's just like, oh, okay, well, that's done. Now, my son's 1.5, and he's, I don't know, some form of choleric, and he is just the most dense, like I can yell at him, and even whatever it is, and he's just like, oh, wait, what's the deal? Are you talking to me, Dad? Just like, oh man. And so it's very different. I mean, very different ways of getting through to somebody, and they're certainly not the same. But that's a hard thing as a parent, and I'm sure as a priest as well, is understanding that you have to treat everyone fairly, but you can't treat everyone the same. You can't. They are not built to be exactly treated as apple to apple, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true. And what you said about your daughter, that's exactly it. She knows when someone's disappointed. I, Usually, it's not the case for, I would say, the more intellectual melancholics, but the ones that are more geared towards the contemplative, I guess. You can generally walk into a room, you can read the room right away. Nobody has to say anything. You just walk in and you can feel the tension. You can read the room really easily. Whereas, and I'm not saying this about you, but the phlegmatic usually won't pick up on those things, the sanguine usually won't either. So it's interesting, but the melancholic, generally, you'll hear them say, oh, I just have a gut feeling about this situation. Can't really describe it in words, but can read the room pretty easily. That's interesting. So that was interesting what you said about your daughter. It's very true.
Yeah, they're very introspective. It is, again, I guess it's that always something going on, and I think it is the case. And sometimes it's a good thing for the phlegmatic. Sometimes it's bad. That there's a lot of empty space up there sometimes. And I mean, I can speak for myself. That it just is how it is sometimes. And I think that it's one of those things that, again, that can be good and it can be bad. Like every temperament. I mean, they all have their pros and cons, and even sometimes their pros can be cons, I suppose, depending on how they're used. And I think that's also an important thing with the temperaments, that I think it's important not to think one of them better than the other. I'm sure. I mean, I think Christ was the perfect parts of all temperaments, right? And obviously none of the bad parts of any of them. So I'd say obviously that should be our ultimate goal, is to have it so no one actually knows what our temperament is, I suppose. I mean, to be like Christ, and so that only the good things come out. Now, easier said than done, but I suppose that's the ultimate goal.
So exactly. So, the fact that you knew I was melancholic means I got some work to do. That's the melancholic way of saying it.
I think actually, I think you brought it up in our first podcast. I think you mentioned how you had been scrupulous and whatnot. So that was why it was actually, it was not me being overly perceptive. It was just because it's like, oh, okay, that sounds like something that must be a melancholic. I mean, your first interview definitely did not seem like a phlegmatic, for sure. But it's interesting, Your Excellency, and I think it's nice to see the different temperaments and how again how they all work, and how you can, each one of them can do something great, and each one of them can be something terrible. And I think it's really interesting when you see priests who can give such great sermons, and they can be melancholic, choleric, or sanguine. You might see that in a sermon, but
Yeah.
maybe, but it doesn't really matter, I suppose. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's amazing, the way that God created everybody differently, wires them differently so that they think differently, they act differently. And so each person, each temperament, they have their own side of the mountain to climb, you might say. Their own. So it's important to know the negative sides and the positive sides of your temperament. Cultivate the good, because that's the inclination to grace that God has put in you. So, you have to develop that, and you just as much as you have to overcome the bad inclinations. So know thyself. That's a good spiritual axiom.
Absolutely. And I think Your Excellency, I think you kind of mentioned before, but I was going to ask you who is the saint that people should pray to who are suffering with scruples, but I think you kind of already said that is
Yeah,
Saint Teresa.
Saint Therese, she's the best. So
Perfect. Well, Your Excellency, I don't know, did you have any last words, anything we missed, anything you wanted to mention before we go?
no, I think that covers it. Obviously, we didn't exhaust the subjects. There's a lot more you could say, but it gives a pretty good idea, I think, of the two topics.
Absolutely. Well, I greatly appreciate Your Excellency. For me, it was a lot. I'm going to have to go back and listen to it again. That's how it typically is, especially the podcast I really like. I'm like, okay, I got to go back and listen again because my mind is oftentimes trying to go on to the next question and stuff. But very interesting and a very good perspective. I mean, especially again coming from a melancholic. And I think I told you before the show. I think what I want to try to do is get on a member of the clergy from each temperament to talk about that temperament. I think that could be really interesting. So now we've done melancholic. Now I'm going to have to work on the other three. So everyone say a prayer that I find it. And if anyone knows a clergy member who is phlegmatic, let me know, because that's going to be the toughest one, I think. But someone's out there. There is one out there. I have no doubt about it. So if anyone has any recommendations for me, again, of course, charitably. I'm not saying phlegmatic's bad, guys. Come on, phlegmatic is not bad. I'm saying everyone always thinks it's like you say someone's phlegmatic, like, oh, it's like, hey, come on, I'm a phlegmatic. It's not only bad. There's good things with phlegmatics as well. But anyway, please email me at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Please like, share, subscribe, comment, and really share this with parents, especially, or anyone who should I say share it with someone you think might have scruples? Maybe not. That might be a little bit awkward, but share it at least. Not. Right, probably don't do that. But share it with parents, because I think there was a lot to learn about children and how to raise melancholics. And again, could you mention one more time the name of that book, Your Excellency?
There are a few of them. There's the one by Alfred Hawk. That's a classic one. And then the other one is The Four Temperaments by Father Antonio Royo Marin. And that's ROYOMARIN.
Great. Perfect. Your Excellency, I really appreciate it. Until next time, God bless you.
God bless you.